Welcome back to the Babbling Pastor Podcast, the best podcast on the internet. Today, our sponsor being nobody still. Welcome. I'm Michael, one of your hosts, and this is
Rob.
The other one. Okay, so I'm sorry. The other one seems the best other host ever on a podcast. Rob. All right. Not quite. Okay. All right. Sorry. I tried to build you up a little bit. I guess you just
have to go to confession now.
You go to confession. We came from a generation in which everybody won and everybody was good. I was just trying to pump you up, make sure you didn't feel bad, and internalize negative feelings so that you could be successful in life. That's all I was trying to do. But I guess.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you looking out for me.
Yeah, I'm trying. I was trying, but you're not helping me do that. So, anyway. Today, we are going to continue our series on reacting to videos. Now, this one, I just want to be clear. This isn't a video. Apparently, one of the ways people can grow on Instagram, I've come to find out, or TikTok, is what you do. It's all about retention. Here's a little retention hack for you guys. I know it's not what this episode's about, but retention hack, coming close. So, yes, write this down. So, apparently, if you can make someone watch your reel all the way through, Instagram sees that as a positive. If you watch it through a few times, that's more of a positive. So what people have been doing is putting like videos with just text on top of it that is impossible to read through on just one viewing. And so you have to keep doing it. And so it looks like you're really into this reel, but you just can't read fast enough. And so that's the case with this one. Okay. Let's go over to this. Yeah, this actually, I don't even really need to play the video, to be frank with you, because this is really all that is. But just to prove the point, here you go. That's all it was. That's all it was. Actually, to be fair, I cut it off. There was a curse word at the end that I wasn't going to use. So I edited it. It's piano, and then it's somebody yelling an explicitive. So I cut that part out. And so here's the general idea. It says, the moment you finally realize that God sacrificed himself to save humanity from himself. This is a common argument, oddly enough, even amongst people that say that they've attended church a number of times. Like they said they grew up in church, and then they'll still use this argument, which I think tells us a few things, Rob. It tells us, one, I don't know if theology was rightly taught. I don't know if sermons were rightly preached, and I don't know if discipleship was rightly done. Because if you come out of the church thinking that, like holding seriously to a position that Christianity holds to God sacrificing himself to save humanity from himself, and that is your base claim, there's a few things that's misunderstood a little bit. Now, so what I want to start off with before I throw it over to you, because you're making notes, I don't want to interrupt you in the middle. I want to just start off really clearly with what the gospel is, so that we have this understanding. Now, you can find it in Paul's writings, Peter's writings. You've obviously find it all through the Gospels, but it is this. The Nicene, or the Apostles' Creed is a really good summation of it. A lot of what I say here is going to be very in line with that. So if you know the Apostles' Creed, you're going to say a lot of this is similar. It is that God created the universe. Humanity rebels against God's good creation. God sins. God comes in human flesh as Jesus through a virgin, lives a perfect life. That part's really important. We'll probably talk about that here in a minute. He lives a perfect life that you could not live, dies the death you should have died on a cross, making atonement for your sins, raises from the dead, defeating sin and death, making it possible for you to be reconciled to the Father. He takes on the cross, he takes your sin on himself, gives you his righteousness so that you can now be reconciled to the Father, has ascended into heaven, and will one day come again to judge the living and the dead, in which everyone will stand before the Lord and give account for their lives. Now, I'm sure that somebody will tear that apart. That's the general consensus, though. So when we're saying that Christians believe a certain thing, that's a very summarized version of that. I'm sure in this podcast, I will kind of expound on some of those points, but I just want to make it really clear that that does not equal or line up with God sacrificed himself to himself to save humanity from himself. There's a lot more detail in that than that simple phrase. So before I talk forever and expound on each of those points, your first thoughts, Rob.
Yeah, I think it sure is easy to sum it up to human sacrifice. And so there is a reality, right, that what we are saved from is, you could say, oh, God saves you from yourself. Yeah, sure, that's true, but that's not the whole truth and nothing but the truth, right? At the end of the day, what we're saved from is God's wrath. So yes, we when we are saved, to use that language, that's chiefly, first and foremost, at the end of the day, the bottom line of what we're saved from is, yes, God, his righteous wrath on us as sinful people. And like there's something that popped in my head right when I saw the phrase, is that this idea that people talk about, they'll use the phrase, usually in progressive Christianity, or the emergent church kind of movement back in the day, about the whole cosmic child abuse thing. That tends to, that's what this made me think of. I don't know if that's where this was going, or what they meant by it or whatever, but there's this idea out there that, oh my gosh, God is the Father and he sent his son to die for other people who were terrible, like that's cosmic child abuse, people will say. And so I don't know, I guess first, is that what you read from this, that it's
Uh,
related to that, or
I'm getting that there is just a general idea that from the wording, that the Christian worldview doesn't make sense, because what you're saying is God sacrifices himself to himself. Again, I think the Trinity, a conversation on the Trinity here, the work of the atoning sacrifice, God's wrath being a part of that. I think all of that is sort of convoluted, because there's this idea that how can God sacrifice himself to himself to save humanity from himself? Why, the argument being, like you said, why doesn't he just forgive everyone? What's the need
Mhm.
of a sacrifice, is what I'm kind of getting from that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, okay. So I think, so that's the first, maybe the first problem um with this post in my mind, is there doesn't seem to me to be a very clear, like, what do you want from this? Like, what's the goal of this post? Is it just to, like, make people chuckle? I mean, maybe. I don't know. You're gonna say something?
Oh, I'm just gonna say I think there was wording underneath this that I don't remember what it was though. But it
Okay.
wasn't anything like really thought out, worked out. Anytime I've come again against progressive Christianities, which is just like you said, really has just birthed from the emergent movement. It's just general idea of calling into question basic Christian theology and trying
Hmm.
to trying in this word, in the word usage that is used in this post, to be like, see, this doesn't logically add up. And I think, again, that comes from, as I said at the beginning of the episode, from a misunderstanding of basic Christian theology. Like, if you misunderstand Christian theology and what we hold to, the most baseline, watered down, simplistic idea you're going to get is going to be that. Like, explain then why God needs to sacrifice himself to himself to save you from himself.
Hmm.
And that's why I think a coherent, at least, explanation of the gospel is important, so that it's clear, as the early apologists did, that's not what we're saying, though, right? We're not saying that. There's again, why who was it? Tertullian actually goes through and explains Christians' understanding of the Trinity. Well, when he starts using the word Trinity, God in three persons, is so that he can explain to those that are asking questions or making assumptions on Christians, no, like, you have a sense of what we believe, but you're missing the point or the core of what we're actually saying. So, for example, when I'm talking about, like, and you're talking about, for example, us being saved from God's wrath, yeah, there's a reconciliation that needs to
Hmm.
happen because we are in rebellion against the Father that created all things. And Jesus, being God, offers us a way to be reconciled to the Father because he lives the perfect life that we couldn't live. And in so doing, is the one that can get on the cross and die and make atonement because he's the only one that is able to do that because of his righteous life. And so when we're explaining out the gospel, again, there's going to always be a component of faith here in which you're explaining how is Jesus God? How does this work out? I mean, even with Muslim apologetics, this is always the contention. But at least understanding how Christians approach it, even if somebody disagrees with it, I think eliminates this idea of like, oh, well, God killed himself so that he could save you from himself. And it really unpacks a bit of why why we believe the atonement was necessary and how the atonement even works. Again, this is where Jesus' perfect life comes into play. And so explaining the gospel out in such a way that we are saved from God's wrath. Like we are saved from God, but why is that even a necessity? And why does God not just forgive all of humanity? Well, again, he has set up a system. Again, this is why the Old Testament is important. He has set up a system and a way to be made right. And ultimately, Jesus does that by falling in line with what God has already, explaining the Old Testament as far as sacrifice and being made and being reconciled rather with the Father.
Yeah. I think so. For me, okay, the problem maybe that I'm having with this particular post is that I don't know its purpose. If all it is for them to kind of make a little funny remark, I mean, there are billions of those, and okay, whatever, right? If this is meant in any way to be teaching, then we have an issue, right? Because in a sense, what is said is basically true, but it's very incomplete and unhelpful.
Yeah, I think the point of the post is to throw a wrench into the thought process of a Christian that hasn't been discipled well, and to throw that little question in and go, "Hey, explain this." And when somebody hasn't been taught basic theological, or doesn't even understand the gospel fully, I mean, has understands the gospel as fully as I repeated something and I was saved, but can't explain from what or how or why, then that is enough of a wrench in the cogs of cognitive thinking that they're kind of hung up on it and go, okay, well, that doesn't compute then.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so the idea that there's a need of a sacrifice. I mean, this is very basic Christianity, right? Like you said, that we were born into sin, the sin of Adam, and under sin, and with a sin nature, and that's what we do. Sometimes the first few words that a child learns, one of them is going to be no or mine, right? You just are born sinning. That's just the way that it is. Anyone who is a parent and has children and has watched them from like they have to be taught to do the right things. They do not have to be taught to do the wrong things. Um, some people try to make that case, but it's just not true. They don't have to be taught to sin. That just happens on its own because there's a sin nature, because we're born under this curse, and we are very naturally going to be in rebellion against God on the regular. That's who we are. Paul said in Ephesians that you were darkness, and now you are light. As you know, those who have been regenerate, who are born again Christians. And so, not that you lived in darkness, but that you were darkness. Like this is who you are before Christ. And so, the soul who sins shall die. Right? I mean, God is. I think that what people don't understand is, yes, God is forgiving. Yes, God is loving. Yes, God is merciful. But if sin is simply overlooked and ignored, then God is not just. Then God is not righteous. Then God is not holy. He's not a whole host of things that he claims to be in the scriptures, right? So if God is a just judge, then sin must be punished. And if the wages of sin in general, any sin, all sin, even the smallest sin, if the wages of sin is death, somebody had to die. And I mean that's the basic issue. I think that we as people like we think that our own sins are not as bad, um and so he could just forgive me. I mean, I forgive people all the time for things that they do, and it's not that big of a deal. um what I don't think that we take into account is if someone has legitimately wronged me, and I and I am and I just forgive them, then I have absorbed the punishment for their sin against me. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. God absorbed the punishment for our sins as Christians, through Christ, through his death on the cross. And so it's the same thing. It's not different. It's just that we don't see it the same way because it's maybe not brought out enough. But um, the most offensive part of the gospel message is the part that makes it good news in the first place. It's the bad news. It's that you're a sinner. So
One thing I want to touch on here, and it'll probably be my last comment on this, but I think one of the things you said there was really important, is that even unbelievers in a lot of ways understand the gospel unknowingly, right? There will be people that will forgive people, and offer to be reconciled to them. Like they'll forgive them, and there'll be an offer of reconciliation there. But that person either won't take it, but there is a payment for that. Like if you forgive somebody, you're not letting that go. It doesn't just let go. Like
right.
there's an emotional toll on it, or there's if somebody owes you money, you're taking a hit there. If there's an obligation and they don't fulfill it, you're taking a hit there. Like there's always a payment for wrong done. Like there's a practical reality and understanding to that. And so when you're communicating the gospel, honestly, a lot of people already exercise that, understand the concept, but don't understand why God then demands, a payment for that. Jesus being the one God takes that upon himself, and he takes the hit for that, offering to be reconciled to you, having taken the hit himself. Yep. And so there's this real reality that people understand the concept, but would never actually apply it, right? Because there's got to be payment for it. You can't just let something go, because even when you're letting something go, you're taking the hit for it. And I think what you said there was really helpful, because a lot of people practically understand the need for a sacrifice to be made for reconciliation to occur, but don't apply that same logic when it applies to the one that created the entire universe. And so I think in reality, I mean, that's something that even when we're talking to people about the gospel, or trying to, to say like, there's a little bit more like to it than just this statement. That's a great way to introduce that conversation. It's like, you've been wronged before. Yeah. Have you ever taken the hit for it? Well, 99% of the time when you're having this conversation, somebody has had to take the hit for a business deal or in a relationship or something, and they felt the hit of that. I think that's a great way to introduce the gospel into that conversation, because that they feel on a real level. And when they understand this is what God did for us through Jesus Christ, that may make it even more real for them to say, okay, I didn't understand the nuance before, but I do now. Is that there was a need for something. Somebody had to take the penalty, and Christ does that for you, and makes it to where he took the wrath on himself that you deserved, so that you could be reconciled. And so that because he lived the perfect life that you couldn't live, he just hands that to you. Paul says, like, he takes the sin, he gives you the righteousness, and now you can stand before God because of his perfect life. And I think that's a great way to introduce the gospel to somebody, is just to use that real, like, you get it. You don't think you get it, but you get it in some way or shape or form. To really, like you said, parse out the fact that like it sounds like it is technically true, but there's a lot more to it here. It's not an
Yeah.
equal to that. Like you're thinking of it in far too simplistic of a way, to really, for it to impact you in the way it truly should, there. So any last words?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that a perfect example to walk to, just in closing, to your point and what you brought up there, is so there's a competition now, like UFC or arm wrestling or those kinds of things. Well, there's one that you probably have seen before somewhere, that two guys stand on opposite sides of a little table and they take turns slapping one another, trying to knock one another out.
I've
Have you
seen it.
seen
I
that?
don't have a clue why
Okay.
anybody would want to do that, but yeah.
Yeah, me neither. I think it's crazy. But uh, you now that's a game, right? But that's generally what we would do, how we think, right? We if someone whacks you, you want to whack them right back, right? Retribution, um on taking your own vengeance, right? Revenge. And I think that when Christ was talking about turning the other cheek, a lot of times uh, we misinterpret that, misthink it, or whatever. But this is kind of what he's talking about there, in that when if someone slaps you on the side of your face, what is normative is for you to slap them right back. But instead of that, you absorb that punishment and turn the other cheek. It's kind of a word picture of what we're talking about. Instead of them being slapped, you get slapped again, um, and that's what Christ. That's what God did through Christ. Is He turned the other cheek, and Christ took the punishment that actually we deserved because we slapped Him in the face, we spit in His face, we crucified Him. Um, and so that, I mean, that's the whole thing, man. I mean, that's what He did. So that's probably, if I were going to illustrate that particular way of thinking about it, that's where I would probably go, even as the turn the other cheek bit.
Got it.
But
All right. So good deal. Hopefully you guys found that a little helpful. If nothing else, an explanation of kind of walking through the gospel that you may or may not already know, of the reality that, you can be reconciled to the Father through the Son. And there's a lot of weight to that. Like, it's not as simple as, oh, it just happened. Like there's consequences that
yeah,
were taken and a reconciliation that had to be made. And so if you found it helpful, let us know below. And we will talk to you next week. If you like the reaction, I guess I'll say this. If you like the reaction videos, let us know. We'll continue on this track. If not, guys, there's a lot of stuff we can do. We just kind of do these on the fly anyway. So it's just whatever comes up, that's in our heads. And we'll talk to you next time. See you later. Bye.
bye bye.